Welcome to the deep dive. There's this line from Voltaire that just um, nails a certain kind of human dynamic. They would help one another, harm one another. They could neither live together nor do without one another.
Yeah, that really hits home, doesn't it?
It does. And then you have Mayor Daley's more cynical take. What keeps people apart? Their inability to get
Ah,
together.
well, quite.
And today, that's where we're headed. We're plunging into one of the world's most, well, let's face it, tangled and long-running rivalries, India and Pakistan.
Absolutely. And it's so much more than just borders, isn't it? It's this deep mix of history, identity, decades of struggle.
A real puzzle.
It really is. And we're using insights today from Shooting for a Century, the India-Pakistan Conundrum.
Yeah.
The goal is really to understand why this thing is so intractable. I mean, why does it resist solutions?
And what about those moments where they did try to normalize things? Because there were attempts, right?
Oh, definitely. Surprising ones, sometimes. But yeah, why do they keep hitting a wall? We'll also touch on this idea of a paired minority conflict, which is, I think, a really useful way to look at the whole dynamic.
Okay, so our aim for you listening is to unpack those deep roots, look at the key flashpoints, the things that keep sparking conflict, and explore that search for peace. Basically, a shortcut to getting up to speed on a really critical relationship.
Let's do it.
Right. So the source calls this rivalry, having the dubious distinction of being one of the few conflicts that are truly intractable. That sounds serious. What does intractable mean here beyond just, lasting a long time?
Well, it's not just about duration. It means it's incredibly resistant to the usual ways conflicts get resolved.
Hmm.
We're talking top 5% globally in terms of difficulty. It's fundamentally stuck.
And where does that stuckness come from? Like the very beginning?
Yeah. I mean, the roots go deep, really into that period between, say, 1858, when the British took direct control, and 1947 partition. You'd think, okay, common history, similar cultures, geography.
They should be natural partners almost.
Exactly. But paradoxically, that shared past actually fueled this fundamental clash of national identities as they emerged. It wasn't just about disagreeing over events. It was about disagreeing over who they were becoming as nations.
So that divergence was the spark. But partition in 47, that was the explosion, described as a vast catastrophe. What made it so devastating beyond the obvious chaos, Mountbatten's charm and British haste are mentioned.
Oh, the haste was definitely a factor.
Yeah.
Catastrophic results, as the source says.
Yeah.
But the lasting impact, it's profound. You got maybe 5.5 million Hindus and Sikhs leaving Pakistan for India, similar numbers of Muslims going the other way.
Just staggering numbers.
It is. And it wasn't just moving house, it created these memories, right?
Mhm.
Often, the source says, wildly distorted versions of the truth, passed down generation to generation. These stories became like foundational myths for each side, defining themselves against the other.
And the borders weren't even clean, were they? These princely states.
Exactly. Hundreds of them. Places like Kashmir, Hyderabad, Junagadh. Their integration wasn't fully sorted. So instead of clear lines, you got this legacy of disputed territories, Kashmir being the most obvious and painful example.
So right from the start, you have these competing visions, competing anxieties. Is this where that paired minority idea starts to creep in, where both sides feel threatened?
You're right on it. That's exactly the seed. You had the Congress Party aiming for a united secular India.
Sure.
But the Muslim League, they saw a future dominated by Hindus and demanded not just a separate state, but crucially a separate army right from the get-go.
Wow, a separate army from day one.
Yeah, it shows how deep that sense of needing separation and security was. It wasn't just politics, it was about survival, about identity.
Yeah.
That's versus them was baked in.
Okay, so those are the origins, the deep wounds. Let's move to the present, or at least the things that keep this conflict burning. What are the key flashpoints?
Well, Kashmir is unavoidable. It's ground zero, really.
Still,
Uh.
after all this time?
Absolutely. And it's not just a line on a map. The source says it raises deep questions about justice and equity, about national identity itself for both India and Pakistan.
And they can't agree on who should control it or how to even ask the Kashmiris?
Pretty much. They disagree on the how, but interestingly, they both seem to agree they don't want a fully independent Kashmir. And the narratives around Kashmiri Muslims for Pakistan and Kashmiri Hindus, the Pandits, for India, those are powerful emotional triggers that keep getting pulled.
It's amazing how symbolic these things become. Like the Siachen Glacier, the two bald men fighting over a comb line really paints a picture.
It does, doesn't it? It sounds absurd. but it tells you so much about the underlying mistrust.
Because strategically, it's not that important.
Well, the sources, the glacier itself and the Saltoro Ridge, have no strategic significance in themselves. But India is fixated on the Karakoram Pass nearby. They worry about Pakistan and China linking up there, flanking them in Kashmir.
Ah, okay. So there's a perceived threat, even if the ground itself isn't key.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's apparently the only issue where the Indian Army publicly digs its heels in and says, no compromise. Despite the awful human cost, more soldiers dying from the cold than from fighting.
Wow. That says a lot about how fear overrides logic sometimes. That paired minority thing again. Security above all else.
It fits that pattern perfectly, yeah. And then there's water, another fundamental resource.
Right, the Indus Waters Treaty from 1960, that's often held up as a rare success story, isn't it?
It is. The most important water treaty in the world, some call it. It survived 50 years of hostility, which is pretty amazing.
How did they manage that when everything else was so fraught?
The key seems to have been purposeful depoliticization. The World Bank, engineers. They treated it like a technical plumbing problem, basically. Allocating rivers, building infrastructure, focusing on the engineering, not the politics.
Clever. But you said was. Is it under pressure now?
It is. It's acquired and intensely emotional content now. It's become politicized science. Pakistan's downstream, it's water short, worried about India building dams upstream. India's economy is booming, it's starved for power, needs those hydro projects, so that old technical fix is getting strained by new pressures and that enduring distrust.
Okay, so history, land, water, and then 1998 happens, nuclear weapons. How did that change the game?
Oh, massively. Fundamentally. Yeah. Suddenly, mutual and assured destruction is alive and well in South Asia.
Scary thought.
Definitely. On one level, maybe it raised the stakes, but also reduced the chances of a new conflict, a full-scale conventional war, at least, the ultimate deterrent.
There's always a but, isn't there?
The paradox is it also drove their conflict underground.
Yeah.
So instead of open war, you get more proxy conflicts, covert stuff, each side testing the patience of the other. And the risk of limited war is always there.
Limited war. That sounds like something that could spiral fast.
Exactly. It can get out of hand and become total war. And you have different postures. India says no first use. They won't strike first with nukes. Pakistan's stance is seen as more ambiguous, which adds another layer of unpredictability.
Chilling, really. The ultimate weapons, but the conflict just shifts shape. So given all this deep distrust, the nukes, how do they even try to normalize things?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Normalization, in the traditional sense, respecting borders, not trying to undermine each other, that's the goal. But the approaches, they've been incomplete.
What do you mean incomplete?
Well, you've got the top-down approach, leaders talking, diplomacy, elite agreements, and the bottom-up, people-to-people stuff, trade, cultural exchange. The source argues neither has really worked on its own. They haven't been enough to overcome that fundamental distrust.
Let's take trade, that bottom-up angle. Pakistan offered most favored nation status. India promised to lower barriers. Sounds positive. But South Asia is still the least economically integrated region. Why?
It's a huge paradox. Official trade is tiny, like $3 billion back in 2011. Compare that to India-China trade, $74 billion, or Pakistan-China, $11 billion. It's negligible.
But isn't there unofficial trade? Smuggling?
Exactly. Informal or illegal trade is high. Estimates range wildly, from $200 million up to maybe $10 billion, which shows the economies could work together. They're complementary. Pakistan apparently pushed for more trade, partly out of deep economic disorder, desperation, maybe. But politics and security fears just keep slamming the door shut on official integration.
What about culture? Cricket, Bollywood, students. Does any of that connection help?
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? But it seems limited. Visas are really hard to get, so hardly any students cross borders to study. Cricket matches get canceled because of security fears.
Even cricket, that seems like such a natural bridge.
You'd think. And social media. It's a double-edged sword. Yes, it helped expand avenues of information, but it also gives extremists as well as moderate voices electronic loudspeakers. Governments find it harder to control a narrative, and they can just amplify those feelings of being threatened on both sides.
So what do ordinary people actually think? Is it all driven by elites, or do publics genuinely want this hostility?
The polls are really interesting, kind of contradictory. You had a Pew poll in 2011 showing historic hostility in Pakistan towards India, 72% unfavorable, big threat perception.
Okay, sounds pretty negative.
But then just a year later, another poll found 62% of Pakistanis thought improving relations was important. Indians, too, see Pakistan as a threat, sure, 45% in 2011, but both populations showed pretty low appetite for more defense spending, only 31%.
Mm. So it's not black and white. There's distrust, but maybe also a desire for something better.
Exactly. It suggests that the leadership maybe isn't entirely reflecting a monolithic public demand for conflict. There's nuance there.
And what about outsiders? Can countries like the U.S. actually do anything useful here?
The U.S. role has been ambivalent, as this source puts it. They tried to dehyphenate deal with India and Pakistan separately, not just as a pair, especially after the Cold War. But the reality is outsiders can do little directly to address the core identity and strategic disputes.
They can't force them to trust each other.
Right. But they can sometimes help with practical, integrative programs, like the Indus Waters Treaty, handled by the World Bank. That worked precisely because it sidestepped the politics and focused on the technical problem. That seems to be the only viable path for outsiders to stay out of the identity fight, focus on practical cooperation where possible.
Okay, this feels like a good point to bring in that really interesting concept you mentioned earlier, paired minority conflicts. You said it's key to understanding why this is so stuck. Break that down for us. What is it?
Right. It's a framework that really helps make sense of intractable disputes like this one. Basically, a paired minority conflict is where you have significant groups on both sides who genuinely see themselves as the threatened, weaker party, even if, on paper, they're the majority in their own country. It's a psychological state of insecurity.
Okay, so both sides feel like victims, like the underdog.
Precisely. And there are 5 key characteristics that define it, according to the source. First, insecurity and distrust just permeate everything. Every move by the other side is seen through that lens, making concessions incredibly hard. Think Siachen.
Okay, deep distrust. Makes sense.
Second, time is critical, but not in a good way. Each side kind of hopes time is on their side, that the other might weaken or collapse, so there's less urgency to compromise now.
Right, waiting for the other guy to blink, maybe.
Third, that persecuted minority syndrome we touched on. Both sides claim victim status. India talks about historical invasions, cross-border terrorism. Pakistan talks about Hindu dominance, Indian aggression, Kashmir. This sense of victimhood justifies their own resistance, even violence.
Got it. Number 4.
Fourth, it's morally energized. The fight isn't just about power. It's framed as a righteous struggle for justice, often linked back to those historical wounds like partition. This makes it much harder to compromise because it feels like giving up on justice itself.
And the last one?
Fifth, outsiders are limited. We just talked about the U.S. role. External powers find it really hard to intervene effectively because the conflict is driven so much by these internal perceptions and identity issues. You can't easily mediate a feeling of existential threat.
Wow. Okay, that framework, it really does put a lot of the pieces together. It explains why logical solutions, like trade, just don't seem to stick.
Exactly. It highlights how the conflict reinforces itself through these psychological and emotional dynamics.
So we've journeyed through a lot here. The deep wounds of partition, those persistent flashpoints like Kashmir and Siachen, the water issues, the nuclear shadow hanging over everything, the struggles with normalization, and now this paired minority lens.
Yeah, it's a complex picture. The source sums it up as a textbook case of intractable conflict. And it offers an interesting thought on the way forward. It's as a heart transplant, trying to erase all the history and bad blood that's just naive, impossible.
Right, you can't just forget decades of conflict.
But maybe, it suggests, bypass surgery is possible, focusing on the doable issues. Things like trade, maybe managing the border better, specific cooperative projects. Essentially, finding ways around the big core identity fights like Kashmir, rather than trying to solve them directly right now.
Kind of nibbling around the edges, finding practical wins where you can.
Sort of. Going around the blockages rather than trying to blast through them. But even that is hard because, as the source notes, the relationship is constantly getting blown apart by a serious miscalculation. The underlying tensions are always there.
And there's another paradox mentioned, right? About Pakistan weakening.
Yes, that's a really sharp observation. As the Pakistani state faces internal challenges and perhaps weakens, the need for normalization actually becomes all the more urgent for regional stability. But India, now stronger, with its found capabilities and rising status, it understandably struggles with the idea of normalizing relations with a state it sees as potentially fading or erratic.
Yeah.
That mismatch, that asymmetry, makes finding common ground incredibly difficult.
A very tough dynamic, locked in. So as we wrap up, what's one final thought, maybe a provocative one, to leave us chewing on?
Well, the source ends with a really powerful image, I think. It says, This is a conflict that Pakistan cannot win and India cannot lose. Think about that.
Can't win, can't lose.
Yeah, and then it paints this picture. India and Pakistan are like two gladiators locked together, each holding a nuclear weapon that cannot be used at close quarters, and their relationship suffused with the psycho-political dynamic of a paired minority conflict.
Wow, gladiators with nukes they can't use. That captures the stalemate, the danger, and that psychological trap all at once.
It really does. It defines their present reality, this incredibly dangerous, persistent stalemate.
So here's the question to ponder. Does that kind of unique, high-stakes stalemate where neither can win, neither can lose, and the ultimate weapons are unusable, does that very deadlock potentially create space for a different kind of future? Could it force them towards paths that typical conflict resolution doesn't even consider? Something to think about.